On a gray afternoon in late October, rain fell in slow, steady sheets over the town of Cedar Hollow, the kind of rain that doesn't pour hard enough to flood the streets but lingers long enough to turn dirt into slick mud and fog up every car window. Out near the edge of town, where the paved road gave way to gravel and the trees leaned close like they were sharing secrets, a dark sedan sat tilted slightly to the right, front tire sunk into a soft patch beside the trailhead. Inside the car, a woman sat calmly, engine off, phone in hand. She'd already called for roadside help. The tow truck was on its way, the dispatcher had said, maybe 20 minutes out. She didn't seem worried. She wore a long wool coat, the kind that looked expensive but practical, and her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel as she watched the rain slide down the glass. She wasn't from around here, but she knew the area well enough. She'd been coming to this trail for years, long before the town added picnic benches or a posted speed limit on the access road. A few minutes later, red and blue lights flashed behind her. She checked the rear-view mirror. A patrol car rolled to a stop, tires crunching over wet gravel. Two officers stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the mud. One was tall with a stiff posture and a jaw that stayed clenched even when he wasn't talking. The other was younger, eyes darting between the car and his partner like he was waiting for a signal. The woman rolled down her window just enough to hear them over the rain. "Everything all right, ma'am?" the older officer asked. His voice wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either, just flat, like he'd said the same words 100 times that week. "Yes," she said. Tire went flat. "I've already called for assistance." He nodded slowly, but didn't move away. "You live around here?" "No," she said. "Just visiting." "Visiting what?" "There's nothing out here but trees." "The trail," she said. "I hike sometimes." He glanced at the younger officer, who shifted his weight, then back at her. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" She looked at him. Not with fear, not with anger, just with a quiet kind of assessment, like she was deciding whether this was worth her time. "Am I being detained?" "No, ma'am," he said, though his hand rested near his belt. "Just routine." She sighed softly, turned off the interior light, and opened the door. The mud sucked at her shoes as she stepped out. Rain dotted her coat, but she didn't flinch. "Hands where I can see 'em," the younger officer said suddenly, voice tighter than before. She paused. "Why?" "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," the older one said. Though he didn't say who or what that someone had done, she didn't argue. She just stood there, hands at her sides, rain dripping off the brim of her coat. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said evenly. "And if you're going to detain me, you'll need probable cause." That's when things changed. The older officer's expression hardened. "Turn around," he said. Now she didn't move. "On what legal basis?" That question, calm, clear, and rooted in something he couldn't ignore, seemed to set him off. He stepped forward, grabbed her arm, and spun her toward the car. She didn't resist, but she didn't help either. Her body went slack, not out of defiance, but out of principle. "That was enough for them. Stop resisting," the younger officer barked, though the video later showed she hadn't moved a muscle beyond what they forced her to do. They yanked her arms behind her back and snapped on plastic restraints, tight enough to leave marks. Then, without warning, they pulled her away from the car and started dragging her toward their cruiser. Her feet slipped in the mud. Her coat snagged on a low branch. She didn't cry out, but her breath came faster now, not from pain but from disbelief. A few cars had slowed down by then. One even stopped farther up the road. A man rolled down his window, filming with his phone, but he didn't get out. No one did. By the time they shoved her into the back seat, her coat was streaked with mud, her hair damp and tangled. She sat upright, eyes forward, saying nothing. Inside, though, her mind was already working. Not on revenge, not on outrage, but on what came next. Because she knew this wouldn't end in the back of a patrol car. It would end somewhere else. Somewhere with wood-paneled walls, a raised bench, and silence so heavy you could hear a pen drop. Back at the station, they booked her under a vague charge. Obstruction or failure to comply. Something they could justify later if they had to. They didn't run her ID right away. They assumed she was just another person who didn't know her place. Someone who'd learned her lesson by morning and disappear quietly. They didn't check her credentials. They didn't look her up. They just filed the report, turned off the lights in the holding room, and went home thinking the day was done, but it wasn't, because the woman in the back seat wasn't just anyone. She was the one who'd been assigned to hear their department's upcoming internal review case, a case involving excessive force complaints from the summer. She'd received the file just that morning. And now, after being dragged through the mud for asking a simple question, she sat in silence, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights, already planning how she'd handle what came next. Not with anger, not with drama, but with the full weight of the law, applied evenly, fairly, and without fear. Outside, the rain kept falling. The tow truck finally arrived, found the empty car, and called the station to ask what happened. No one gave a straight answer. By dawn, the video from the bystander had been shared online. Not widely, not yet, but enough that a few local reporters were already calling the courthouse, trying to confirm a rumor. The officers didn't know it, but their routine stop had just unraveled something much bigger than a flat tire or a muddy coat. It had pulled a thread that would soon tug at the whole fabric of how things were done in Cedar Hollow. And the woman they'd dragged through the mud, she wasn't going anywhere. She was just getting started. 2 mornings later, the county courthouse stood quiet under a pale sun that hadn't yet burned off the morning chill. Inside courtroom 3, the air smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. A few reporters lingered near the back, whispering. Word had spread, not loudly but steadily, that something unusual was about to happen. The kind of thing people talk about in hushed tones over diner coffee or while waiting for the bus. At the defense table, 2 uniformed officers sat stiffly, side by side. They'd been called in for a routine internal affairs hearing, a follow-up on a complaint filed months ago by a teenager who claimed he'd been shoved against a patrol car during a traffic stop. It wasn't their first complaint, but it wasn't serious enough, they'd thought, to threaten their badges. Just paperwork. Just another box to check. The older officer kept adjusting his collar. He hadn't slept well. Ever since that rainy afternoon, something had been gnawing at him. Not guilt exactly, but unease. The woman they'd detained hadn't screamed or cursed. She hadn't cried or begged. She'd just looked at them calm and steady, like she saw right through them, and then she'd vanished into the system, processed and released within hours. He'd assumed that was the end of it. The younger one kept glancing at his phone under the table, scrolling through messages. His girlfriend had seen the video online. "You sure that's not you?" she'd texted. He'd lied and said no. But the footage was clear. Too clear. The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise," everyone stood. The side door opened, and there she was. Same coat, now clean, pressed, hanging just right over her shoulders. Same posture, straight but not stiff, like she carried herself with purpose, not pride. She walked to the bench without looking left or right. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead as she took her seat, adjusted her robe, and nodded to the bailiff. The officers froze. It hit them at the same moment, like a cold wave. The woman from the roadside, the one they'd dragged through the mud, the one they'd booked and forgotten, now she was the judge. The younger officer's throat went dry. He looked at his partner, eyes wide, but the older one just stared straight ahead, jaw tight, face pale. Neither spoke. Neither moved. They stood there like statues while the rest of the room settled back into their seats. She didn't acknowledge them. Not with a glare, not with a pause, not even with a flicker of recognition. She simply opened the case file in front of her, flipped a page, and said in a voice that was calm but carried to every corner of the room, "Please be sworn in." The clerk administered the oath. The officers raised their right hands, voices shaky as they repeated the words. When they sat back down, their hands rested flat on the table, too flat, like they were trying not to tremble. The hearing began like any other. The internal affairs investigator read the summary of the original complaint. Bodycam footage from the summer incident was queued up on the courtroom screen. But as the video played, grainy, distant, showing a teen stumbling backward after being shoved, the officers weren't watching the screen. They were watching her. She took notes. Slow, deliberate strokes of her pen. No expression. No reaction. Just listening, observing, absorbing. Then came the unexpected. "Your Honor," the investigator said, glancing at his notes. "There's been a recent development related to Officer Reeves and Officer Briggs that may be relevant to this review." She looked up. "Go ahead." He cleared his throat. 2 days ago, both officers were involved in an off-duty detention near Cedar Trail. The individual detained filed a formal complaint this morning. Bodycam and civilian footage have been submitted. Given the nature of the incident and the complainant's identity, it's been flagged for immediate judicial review. A murmur rippled through the room. The reporter sat up straighter. She didn't flinch. Is the footage part of the record now? It is, Your Honor. Then let's see it. The screen switched. This time the video was sharp, filmed on a smartphone, steady, close enough to hear every word. There she was, standing by her car, rain falling, asking, "On what legal basis are you detaining me?" Then the sudden grab, the zip ties, the drag through the mud, her coat tearing, her silence as they shoved her into the back seat. The courtroom was dead quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder. She watched the whole thing without moving. When it ended, she turned a page in her file, slowly, deliberately, and looked at the two officers. "Did you obtain consent before restraining this individual?" She asked, voice level. "No, Your Honor," the older officer said quickly. "We believe she matched the description of a suspect." "Was a suspect description issued that day?" "No, ma'am." Did she raise her voice? Make a sudden movement? Reach for anything? No. Then what exactly constituted a threat? He opened his mouth, closed it. "She?" questioned our authority. A pause, long enough for everyone to feel it. "Questioning authority," she said quietly, "is not a crime. It's a right." She turned to the investigator. "I'll review the full materials and issue a ruling by end of day. This hearing is adjourned." As people filed out, the officers stayed seated, stunned. They didn't speak until the room was nearly empty. "What do we do?" the younger one whispered. The older one just shook his head. "We wait." Outside, the video was already spreading. Not just locally now, state news picked it up. Judge detained by officers who didn't know who she was. Headlines were careful, factual, but the public didn't need embellishment. The truth was dramatic enough. Back in her chambers, she removed her robe and sat at her desk. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. This wasn't personal, it never was. But it was personal to the people who lived with the fear of being treated like suspects just for existing. She'd seen it in courtrooms and filings, in the quiet voices of those who didn't think the system would listen. Now the system had to listen to her. She opened the complaint file again. Read every line. Watched the footage once more, not as a victim but as a judge, because that's what she was. Not a symbol, not a headline. A person sworn to uphold the law, even when it pointed back at those who wore badges, and she knew with quiet certainty that this wasn't just about two officers making a bad call. It was about what happened next. Would the department defend them? Would the town look away? Or would this moment, this strange, unlikely collision of power and principle, finally force a change? She picked up her pen, not to write a verdict yet, but to start drafting the questions that would lead to one. Because justice didn't roar. It waited, it watched, and when the time was right, it spoke, clear, firm, and impossible to ignore. The courtroom felt heavier the next morning, like the air itself had thickened with expectation. People arrived early. Lawyers, clerks, even a few regular citizens who'd never set foot in a courtroom before. They didn't come for drama. They came because something real was happening, something that touched the line between power and fairness, and they wanted to see it for themselves. At the defense table, the two officers sat again, but this time they didn't fidget or whisper. They were quiet, eyes down, shoulders tense. Overnight, the video had exploded online. Not in a flashy, sensational way, but in the steady, spreading kind that sticks. Community groups shared it. Legal blogs analyzed it. Even the local paper ran a front-page story with a single line beneath the headline, "When the Law Looks Back." The judge entered without fanfare. Same measured steps, same calm expression. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and nodded to the clerk. No one needed to be told this wasn't just another hearing. Everyone in the room knew. The prosecutor stood first. "Your Honor, we've compiled all available evidence regarding the October 18th roadside incident, including body cam footage from both officers, 2 civilian recordings, the 911 call from the complainant's tow service, and written statements from 3 witnesses who stopped at the scene." She nodded. "Proceed." The screen lit up again. This time, it wasn't just one video, it was a sequence. First, the body cam from the older officer. Grainy, angled downward, showing the woman standing by her car, hands visible, voice steady. Then the moment he grabbed her arm. The audio crackled slightly, but her words were clear. "I haven't broken any laws." You have no right to detain me. Then came the younger officer's footage, shaky, showing her being pulled backward, feet slipping in the mud. He shouted, "Stop resisting!" But the video showed no resistance at all, just a woman being moved against her will, silent except for a sharp intake of breath when her shoulder hit the ground. Next, the civilian video, the clearest of all. Shot from a car window, it captured everything. The calm before the escalation, the sudden violence of the restraint, the way her coat tore as they dragged her. It even caught the moment she looked directly into the camera, not pleading, not angry, just present. Human. When it ended, the room stayed silent. Even the hum of the air vent seemed too loud. Then the cross-examination began. The defense attorney, hired by the police union, stood. "Officer Reeves, in your statement, you said the individual appeared evasive and uncooperative. Can you explain what you meant by that?" The older officer cleared his throat. She wouldn't answer our questions directly, kept asking about legal grounds instead of just doing what we asked. So she asked questions? Yes. And did those questions include threats? No. Did she raise her voice? No. Did she move toward you or reach into her vehicle? No. The attorney paused, then tried another angle. You believe she matched a suspect description. Was that based on a bulletin? No bulletin, the officer admitted. But we'd had reports of trespassing in the area. Were those reports recent? Couple weeks ago. Were they connected to a black woman in a dark sedan? No. The judge didn't interrupt. She just watched, pen moving across her notepad. Every word, every pause, every contradiction, she caught it all. When it was the prosecutor's turn, the questions cut deeper. "Officer Briggs, you shouted, 'Stop resisting!' during the detention. Yet the video shows the complainant offering no physical resistance." "Why did you say that?" The younger officer shifted. "In the moment, it felt like she was tensing up. Tensing up how? Her arms? She wasn't helping us, so not resisting, but not assisting. Is that correct?" He hesitated. "I guess. Is it department policy to detain someone who doesn't assist an officer?" "No, then why did you?" He had no answer. Outside the courtroom, people gathered in small groups during the break. A retired school teacher talked to a young delivery driver. A mother held her toddler's hand and whispered, "That could have been me." No one was shouting. No one was holding signs. But something had shifted. It wasn't about one woman or two officers anymore. It was about what people expected from those sworn to protect them, and what happened when that trust broke. Back inside, the judge called the final witness, the woman herself. She walked to the stand not in her judge's robe, but in the same coat from the video, clean now but with a faint scuff near the hem. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat. The prosecutor asked simple questions. "Where were you going that day?" "To hike the Cedar Trail. I go every fall." "Had you done anything illegal?" "No." "Did you understand your rights?" "Yes." "Why did you ask about probable cause?" "Because I believe in the law, and I expected the officers to follow it too." She didn't sound bitter. She sounded disappointed, like someone who'd hoped for better and been let down, not for the first time. The defense attorney tried to challenge her tone, her background, her motives. But she answered every question plainly, without anger, without performance. Just facts, just truth. When she stepped down, the room felt different, lighter somehow, not because justice had been served yet, but because it was finally being spoken aloud in a place where it mattered. Later that afternoon, the judge reviewed her notes one last time. She didn't rush. She read each line, replayed each moment in her mind. She thought about the teenager from the original complaint, the bystanders who filmed but didn't intervene, the dispatcher who'd sent a tow truck to an empty car. She thought about the years of small injustices that never made headlines but wore people down like steady rain on stone. Then she began to write, not with fury, not with vengeance, but with precision. Because the law wasn't a weapon. It was a tool, and it only worked when used fairly. By the time she sealed the ruling, the sun had dipped below the courthouse roof. She handed the envelope to the clerk with 2 words. "File it." And just like that, the next chapter began. Not with a bang, but with a decision that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls. Months passed, and the sharp edges of that rainy afternoon in Cedar Hollow began to soften. Not because people forgot, but because something real had started to grow from the crack it left behind. The town didn't transform overnight. There were no parades, no grand speeches on the courthouse steps. But change, when it's honest, rarely arrives with fanfare. It shows up quietly, in new rules and changed habits and the way people look at each other a little differently. The two officers faced consequences, yes. One pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges of unlawful restraint and was sentenced to community service, mandatory training, and a permanent mark on his record. The other fought it longer, but eventually accepted a deal that ended his career in law enforcement. Neither returned to the force. Their badges were turned in without ceremony, tucked into a drawer in the chief's office like old receipts from a bill no one wanted to remember. But the real story wasn't just about them. It was about what came after. Within 6 weeks of the judge's ruling, the county council approved funding for a civilian oversight board, something activists had pushed for years, but never got. This time the vote was nearly unanimous. The board wasn't just symbolic. It had power, access to internal reports, the ability to subpoena testimony, and a direct line to the district attorney's office. Its first meeting drew more residents than any town hall in a decade. Then came the training. Not the usual 2-hour slideshow that officers skimmed while checking their phones, but real hands-on sessions led by psychologists, community leaders, and even former detainees. They practiced de-escalation not as a script but as a mindset, learning to pause, to listen, to ask instead of assume. One veteran officer admitted later, "I didn't realize how often I mistook fear for defiance, especially in folks who looked nothing like me." The police chief, who'd initially defended his officers, quietly retired. His replacement was a woman who'd spent 10 years in community outreach before ever wearing a badge. Her first act? She walked into the judge's chambers, not to argue, not to plead, but to ask, "How do we do better?" The judge didn't give her a list. She gave her a question. Who are you serving? The law or the people the law is meant to protect? That question became the department's new motto. It was printed on training manuals, posted in break rooms, even stitched into the lining of new uniforms. Small thing, maybe, but symbols matter when they're backed by action. Meanwhile, the woman who'd been dragged through the mud kept doing her job. She heard cases involving shoplifters, custody disputes, traffic violations, ordinary matters that made up the quiet rhythm of justice. She never mentioned the incident from the roadside unless it was legally relevant. She didn't seek interviews or applause. When a national news outlet asked for a sit-down, she declined with a simple note. "My role is to interpret the law, not to become part of the story." But the story followed her anyway, not as a victim, but as a reminder. At a legal conference in the spring, she was invited to speak on judicial ethics. Most expected a lecture on procedure or precedent. Instead, she told a story, without naming names, about a rainy day, a flat tire, and the moment someone forgot that authority must be earned, not just worn. "The law," she said, standing at the podium in a room full of judges, lawyers and students, "is not a shield for those who carry it. It's a promise to those who live under it, and that promise means nothing if it bends for some and breaks for others." The room was silent for a full 10 seconds after she finished. Then came the applause, not loud but deep, the kind that comes from respect, not performance. Back in Cedar Hollow, kids started a high school club called Know Your Rights. They invited public defenders to speak, handed out wallet cards with legal tips, and even organized a mock trial that drew the local paper. One student said, "If a judge can get treated like that, what chance do the rest of us have? We gotta know what's ours." The trail where it all began got a new sign, not just "No trespassing," but "Welcome." Respect the land, respect each other. And on quiet mornings, you could still see the woman hiking there, coat zipped against the breeze, walking alone but never looking lonely. She wasn't a hero in the way movies paint heroes. No dramatic speeches, no last-minute rescues. She was something quieter and maybe more powerful. A person who believed in the system enough to hold it accountable when it failed. And in doing so, she gave others permission to believe again, too. The department didn't fix everything. Mistakes still happened. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a day. But now, when someone called the police with a concern, they got a call back. When a complaint was filed, it was investigated, not buried. And when an officer pulled someone over, they were more likely to say, "Good morning, ma'am, everything okay?" Then reach for their cuffs. That shift, the small, daily choices to treat people like people, was the real victory. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse clock tower, a young officer stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching kids play basketball in the park across the street. He joined the force after the reforms began. He'd read the reports, seen the videos. He knew the weight of the badge wasn't in the metal, but in what you did with it. A woman walked past him, older, black, carrying grocery bags. She nodded as she passed. He nodded back, no words. No suspicion. Just two people sharing a sidewalk in a town that was slowly learning how to be fair. And somewhere inside the courthouse, the judge closed another file, turned off her desk lamp, and walked out into the cool evening air. Just another person going home carrying no grudges. Only the quiet hope that tomorrow would be a little more just than today. Because justice, she knew, wasn't a single moment of reckoning. It was a habit. And habits, once changed, could last a lifetime.